Commander Karin stood on the bridge of the Korthan flagship, her many eyes scanning the dark expanse of space. The Korthans, one of the most feared species in the galaxy, had dominated countless star systems, leaving their mark across the cosmos. Their ships were massive, their weapons deadly, and their warriors were unmatched in battle. Yet now, they found themselves at the edge of a new frontier, the territory of a species they knew little about: humans. It had started as a simple mission. A human scout ship had crossed into Korthan space, a tiny speck compared to the colossal warships that filled the Korthan fleet. The Korthans had heard whispers about these humans, a young species just beginning to explore the stars. They were small and untested, their technology primitive compared to the might of the Korthan Empire. But there was something intriguing about the humans, something that made the Korthans curious enough to pay attention. Karin had expected the scout ship to be a simple target, an easy victory for her fleet. The human vessel, hardly the size of one of their fighter ships, seemed like no threat at all. They had tracked its movements as it slowly made its way through Korthan space. Karin had ordered her fleet to move in, confident that this would be a straightforward operation. Her fleet's weapons were designed for larger targets, armadas, colonies, entire worlds, but she had no doubt that even the smallest ship would be nothing more than a blip in their path. When they first engaged the human ship, things went exactly as expected. The Korthan fleet unleashed a volley of energy blasts, their weapons tearing through the human ship's outer defenses with ease. Karin watched through the bridge's holographic displays as the human vessel began to falter, its shields flickering under the intense fire. She felt a sense of superiority, knowing that the humans were no match for the sheer might of the Korthan Empire. She had been in countless battles, faced warriors from species far more advanced than these humans, and she knew how to crush any enemy that dared to cross her path. The battle, it seemed, would be over in mere moments. But as the battle dragged on, Karin began to feel a sense of unease creeping into her mind. The human ship wasn't breaking apart as quickly as she had expected. Despite their advanced weaponry, despite their overwhelming numbers, the ship was holding on. It was unlike any ship Karin had ever encountered. The Korthan weapons were powerful, designed to cut through the toughest armor and defenses, but they seemed to have little effect on the human ship. It wasn't just the size or the strength of the vessel that confused Karin. It was the way the ship moved, the way it responded to the Korthan attack. It wasn't fleeing or trying to fight back in the usual way. Instead, it maneuvered in ways that seemed almost unnatural. Its movements were calculated, as if the ship knew exactly how to avoid the Korthans' attacks. Karin clenched her fists. She ordered her fleet to intensify the bombardment, to focus all their firepower on the human ship. For hours, they fired relentless beams of energy, one after another, their weapons crackling with power. Yet the human ship refused to break. It swerved and dodged, evading the blasts with an uncanny precision that seemed impossible for such a small craft. The human ship's shields held firm, flickering with energy, but they did not collapse under the Korthan assault. The battle continued, the hours stretching on like an endless nightmare for Karin. Her fleet, usually quick to dominate, was struggling against a single, seemingly insignificant ship. She couldn't understand it. The Korthans had dealt with alien species far more powerful than these humans, but nothing had ever made them feel so helpless. The human vessel seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to outmaneuver their attacks. Every time they thought they had it cornered, it slipped away, evading their grasp. It was as though the human ship was dancing around their attacks, with a rhythm they couldn't comprehend. By the time the Korthans finally managed to disable the human ship's weapons, it was already clear that something was wrong. The battle had taken longer than expected, much longer. Commander Karin stood in stunned silence as her officers confirmed the ship's systems were failing. They had succeeded in disabling it, but it was only after an exhausting struggle. Karin's eyes were wide with disbelief. "Report," she commanded, her voice steady but with a hint of frustration. Her officers quickly accessed the wreckage of the human vessel, their holographic screens displaying a stream of information about the ship's design and technology. The wreckage showed that the human ship was much more advanced than it appeared on the surface. The hull, although thin, was made of a material that was resistant to the Korthan weapons. It wasn't indestructible, but it held up far longer than Karen would have thought possible. And the ship's stealth systems, those were something else entirely. The human vessel had been able to hide its presence from the Korthan sensors for longer than any ship of its size should have been able to. It had the ability to warp its signals, confuse the fleet's targeting systems, and avoid detection in ways that Karen's fleet had never encountered before. Karen's heart raced as she absorbed the information. The Korthans had expected to wipe out this human scout unit in mere minutes, but instead, they had been forced to fight for hours. What did this mean? How was it possible that a species so young, so new to space, could possess such advanced technology? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain. The human ship was no ordinary scout vessel. This wasn't just an unlucky skirmish or a mistake. The humans had something that the Korthans hadn't accounted for. They weren't just some fledgling species stumbling through space. They were something more. Commander Karen, who had led her fleet to countless victories, found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about the galaxy and the species that inhabited it. "Prepare a full analysis of the wreckage," she ordered, her voice now cold with determination. "We need to know everything about their technology. I want to know how a ship like this can exist." But as she looked out into the vast, star-filled emptiness of space, one question lingered in her mind. What else were the humans hiding? Karen stood at the center of the command bridge, her many eyes fixed on the view screen as the vast emptiness of space stretched out before her. The blackness felt different now, colder somehow, as if something had shifted in the balance of the galaxy. Her mind replayed the events of the previous days, the battle with the human scout ship. She had expected nothing more than a brief engagement, a simple display of Korthan might. Yet, the encounter had left her unsettled, and the more she thought about it, the more her doubts grew. Her officers had been quick to report on the aftermath of the battle. The wreckage of the human ship, though small, had revealed a level of technology that should have been impossible for a species so new to space. Commander Karin's many years of experience told her that there was something different about these humans, something they hadn't yet seen. Her fleet had spent countless hours dissecting the data from the battle, and every report only deepened her sense of unease. The technology of the human ship was advanced, too advanced for a species that was just starting to explore the stars. It made no sense. The Korthans had never encountered a species that could hide its presence so easily, or move so fluidly in battle. The human ship had danced around their attacks with unnatural precision, and that was something Karen had not seen before. As her thoughts swirled, a communication came through, interrupting her reverie. The voice on the other end crackled with urgency. It was from the high command of the Korthan Empire, and the tone in the message sent a chill through Karin's bones. The message was simple, but its implications were vast. "Commander Karen, we have received new intelligence. You will not believe what we have discovered about the humans. The ship you destroyed was not part of their main fleet. It was a scout unit. And what you've encountered is nothing compared to what's coming." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Karen stared at the screen in disbelief. A scout unit? It couldn't be. She had fought against entire fleets, crushed armies that dwarfed the size of her own. This human scout ship, though small, had given her fleet a fight that was unlike anything she had faced before. The thought that this was only the beginning, that the human ship was just a small part of something far greater, felt almost surreal. The Korthans had never been bested, in battle, not like this. Every encounter had followed a predictable pattern. Korthan might, overwhelming firepower, and swift victory. The human ship had disrupted that pattern. And now, Corinne was forced to face the possibility that the humans were far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. The communication continued, the voice growing more urgent. Corinne, the human fleet is unlike anything we've seen before. Their ships are far more advanced than you realize. The scout unit you encountered was only a small fraction of their true power. The humans have been preparing for this moment for years, and their fleet is stronger than anything we've faced. They have stealth technology beyond our understanding, and their warships are equipped with weapons that could tear through even the strongest of our defenses. Karin's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. What had she missed? How had the humans been able to hide their true strength for so long? The thought of facing an entire fleet of ships like the one she had fought was almost too much to comprehend. The Korthans had ruled the galaxy for centuries, their power unmatched, their fleets feared. But this was different. The humans were not the easy target they had believed them to be. No, they were something else entirely. And Karin was forced to admit that her fleet had made a grave mistake in underestimating them. The communication ended, but the weight of the message lingered in the air. Karin remained motionless for a long time, staring out into the darkness of space. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, a storm of confusion and dread. She had spent her entire career in the Korthan fleet, and yet she was uncertain of what to do next. She had never faced a species like this, one that could move so silently, strike so decisively. The human fleet, as it turned out, was not just a force to be reckoned with. It was a storm on the horizon, one that threatened to swallow everything in its path. Karin's officers were already at work, analyzing the data and attempting to get a clearer picture of what lay ahead. But for all their efforts, it was clear that the Korthans had no real understanding of the humans. There were no reports from scouts, no intelligence gathered from previous encounters, only fragments of information that painted a picture of a species more formidable than anyone had ever imagined. Karin's fists clenched, her claws digging into her palms. She had always been prepared for battle, ready to face any enemy that came her way. But the idea of fighting a species so unpredictable, so capable of hiding its true strength, was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It wasn't just the technology that worried her. It was the humans' ability to adapt, to fight back in ways that left their enemies guessing. The Korthans were used to knowing their opponents, to understanding the tactics of other species. But the humans? They were a mystery. Days passed as Karin's fleet prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The Korthans had been forced to regroup, to rethink their strategy. Their previous plans, the ones that had worked so well in the past, were no longer reliable. The human fleet was different, faster, smarter, and more dangerous than they had anticipated. Karin stood before her officers, her expression cold and resolute. "We will find them," she said, her voice low and steady. "We will not let the humans slip away again. Our enemies have underestimated us for too long. Now, they will learn what it means to face the Korthan fleet." But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. The human scout ship had been just a small part of a much larger force, and the thought of what lay ahead filled her with a cold, unfamiliar fear. The Korthans had always been the hunters, but now, for the first time in Karin's career, she felt like the hunted. The humans, it seemed, were not only capable of surviving in the vastness of space, they were capable of dominating it. Karin knew one thing for certain. The Korthans were no longer the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The humans were coming, and they would bring with them a reckoning the Korthans had never imagined. The Korthan fleet, once the undisputed masters of the galaxy, now found themselves standing at the edge of a precipice, peering into the unknown depths of fear and uncertainty. Commander Karen could feel it in the air, a tense electric charge that ran through the corridors of her flagship. The warship stood poised for battle, but it wasn't the usual excitement before a victory. No, this was something far different, an ominous quiet before a storm, one that could very well tear apart everything the Korthans had built. The human fleet, its presence still shrouded in mystery, loomed large in Karin's mind. After weeks of preparing for a battle against an enemy they knew almost nothing about, the Korthans were finally ready to confront the humans. The reports, gathered from the wreckage of the scout ship, suggested that the humans' technology was light years ahead of what the Korthans had expected. Karin stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the starfield stretching out before her. She thought of the humans, of their scout ship that had defied her fleet's might. What else could these humans be hiding? What lay beneath the surface of their seemingly primitive civilization? Karin's mind raced, filled with questions that had no answers. She knew one thing for sure. The humans weren't what the Korthans had first believed them to be. They weren't just a species to crush. They were a force to be reckoned with, something that could threaten everything the Korthans had fought for over the centuries. The Korthan fleet had been tracking the human ships for days, using every sensor, every method at their disposal to pinpoint the location of the enemy. And yet, despite their best efforts, the humans had managed to remain elusive, slipping through their detection systems like shadows in the night. It was as though the humans had mastered the art of hiding, of moving undetected through the vastness of space, and the Korthans were left scrambling, trying to catch a glimpse of their enemy. The more Karin thought about it, the more she realized that the human fleet had something far more powerful than their advanced technology. They had the ability to think and adapt in ways that the Korthans had never encountered before. The Korthan commanders gathered in the war room, a dark chamber where the flickering lights cast shadows over the vast holographic maps of the galaxy. The human fleet was out there somewhere, but their exact location remained a mystery. Karin had ordered every possible scan to be conducted, every potential hideout explored, yet the humans were always one step ahead. She could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of responsibility bearing down on her. Her fleet, her warriors, were waiting for her orders, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into a battle they could not win. "Commander," a voice interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see one of her senior officers approach, holding a datapad. The officer's expression was grim, and Karin immediately knew that the news was not good. "We've received another report. The humans have just launched a counteroffensive. They've attacked one of our supply stations near the fringe of our territory. The strike was precise, and they were gone before we could respond." Karin's claws dug into the edge of the table as she fought to maintain control over her emotions. A counteroffensive? The humans had dared to strike at them, to challenge the might of the Korthan fleet on their own turf. It was audacious, and it infuriated her. The Korthans had always been the hunters, never the prey, and now they were being forced to play catch-up with a species they barely understood. "How did they manage it?" Karin asked, her voice low, filled with both rage and disbelief. "We're not sure yet," the officer replied. "Their ships, as you know, are equipped with stealth technology. But this attack, it suggests something more. The way they struck, swift, precise, and then vanished. It's as though they knew exactly where to hit and when to disappear." The officer's words echoed in Karin's mind. The humans were not just hiding. They were learning, adapting, and striking with an intelligence that was far beyond what the Korthans had anticipated. The thought of being outwitted by these upstart humans gnawed at her. It was an insult to the Korthan Empire, a blow to their pride, and it filled her with a cold fury. "We need to strike now," Karin said, her voice cold and commanding. "Prepare the fleet for an all-out assault. We'll find them, and will make them regret ever crossing us." The officer nodded and hurried off to relay the orders, and Karen turned back to the starfield. A battle was inevitable, and it would be one that would define the future of the galaxy. She knew the humans had no idea what they were up against. The Korthans had fought and conquered entire star systems. They had faced species that had nearly wiped them out, only to rise stronger than ever. The humans might have advanced technology, but they were still a young species, one that had never experienced the true horrors of war. Karen was certain that once the Korthans engaged them, they would break, just like every other species that had underestimated her people. Days later, the Korthan fleet finally located the human armada, hiding in the shadows of a barren planet, on the edge of a distant system. The stars in the sky seemed to dim as the Korthan ships moved into position, their massive forms appearing like dark giants against the backdrop of the cold cosmos. Karen stood at the helm of her flagship, her eyes narrowing as she observed the human fleet through the viewscreen. They had come out of hiding, ready to face the Korthans head-on. The humans were brave, perhaps too brave, but Karen was certain they didn't fully understand the scope of what they were about to face. The human ships, though small in number, were well-armed and well-organized. But compared to the might of the Korthan fleet, they were insignificant, or so Karen thought. "Commence the attack," Karen ordered, her voice filled with the certainty of a commander who had never known defeat. The Korthan fleet unleashed a devastating barrage of energy, blasts, their weapons lighting up the dark expanse of space like a storm. The human ships fought back fiercely, but they were outmatched. The Korthan warships were massive, their weapons capable of obliterating entire fleets with a single strike. Yet, as the battle raged on, Karen began to feel a strange unease in the pit of her stomach. The humans weren't panicking, they weren't falling apart. Instead, they were fighting back with a calm, collected precision that defied their smaller numbers. The humans were adapting again, just as they had done with the scout ship. They maneuvered their vessels with eerie precision, avoiding the Korthan fire with incredible skill. And, just as Karen had feared, they were learning, evolving in real time as they fought. The Korthans were no longer the overwhelming force they had once been. The humans had tipped the balance of power, and the more the battle continued, the more Karen realized that the Korthans might not win this time. The humans were no longer the prey. They were the hunters.